What's up, Packer fans? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Thanks so much for joining me today. Always appreciate it. Wanted to take this weekend to discuss the 5 players that I thought are the most overrated Packers and the most underrated Packers. And I'm going to start with underrated because I'd much rather talk about that. This is a question that Marcus Eversole had posed on 107 to 5 in Green Bay this past week, at least the underrated part. And we had a chance to talk to Marcus and I on air this past week. And, he asked me the question and I said, I gave him 3 names at the time, and I'm going to go through 5 today. But I said, there's one that I think is underrated, but starting to finally get the recognition he deserves a little bit. Another that I think has sort of been maybe not overrated, but I think rightfully sort of dragged at times in previous seasons. But I think after this past season, he's actually underrated at this time. And then another just total under the radar player who probably won't, or at least maybe won't even make the team, probably will not make the team. But I still think he's just a really good player. If you've been listening to me, you may know who that is, excuse me. But let's get into it. The first one, the player that I think is starting to get the recognition that they deserve, but who ultimately I still think is underrated, is Adrian Amos. Adrian Amos puts the word safe in safety. But he's not, ultra conservative. He's not, playing so soft or so conservative that, he's actually hurting his team. He is just as sound and as consistent, and as safe and reliable a player at any position that you could possibly have. He is always doing his job. He is always in the right place. I always say I'm shocked that he doesn't end up with more turnovers, because usually if you're consistently in the right place, you're going to be in the right place at the right time more often than not, and you're just going to get a few balls that bounce your way. You're going to get a couple picks. It hasn't come that way for him. I'm still hopeful that at some point in his career, he just has an 8 interception season, because he totally deserves it. And I do think, if you're not a big time playmaker, if you're not getting a ton of picks, forced fumbles, sacks, etc., it's really hard to be in the upper echelon of players and get sort of that recognition. And quite honestly, I don't believe Amos should be in that like upper echelon, right? I don't think he's an all pro. I don't think he's should be like a 10-time Pro Bowler or anything like that. That's fine. He's just a great football player. And as I've noted multiple times in the past, when Green Bay signed him and I went back and I watched every game from the Bears the previous season to see how I thought he would fit in Green Bay, the first thing I noted was, listen, Eddie Jackson's not going to be the same guy without Adrian Amos. And guess what? You're right on the money, right? Not to humble brag, I guess, but like Eddie Jackson has not been the same player since Adrian Amos left. They paired so well together in Chicago because Amos was that safe safety who, was able to cover everything back and sort of cover for Eddie Jackson while Jackson could scream around and do anything that he wanted as the free safety in that defense. Without Amos, they haven't been able to find the right pairing in Chicago, and Eddie Jackson has just fallen off and not played at the same level. Meanwhile, Amos has been nothing but the consummate professional, the consistent player that you get the same really great effort and great performance from week in and week out. You never have to worry about Amos. I can't ever remember him having like this a super bad play or a bad game or anything like that. And that just has so much value. And you don't have to go like how many, bad HaHa Clinton Dix seasons, Kentrell Bryce seasons. Like there's been so many, bad safeties that have, sort of come through Green Bay, or at least, safeties who have struggled, Josh Jones. And like, there's just been so many that it doesn't, of all fans, Packers should know how valuable a good safety is. And Amos is more than that. He's really good. And like I said, I think he's starting to get the recognition that he deserves. But I still don't think it's where he's at, because he's just a really, really good football player. Next up, the player that I think was dragged appropriately for some time, but really came on last season and is playing really good football, and I'm hoping he can carry it over again this season. And I think at this point is actually underrated, is Dean Lowry. And as mentioned previously right here on this show, I think that I had graded over the last 12 games of last season, Dean Lowry not far away from your Adrian Amos's and your Devondre Campbell's. Like, he had a really good last 3 quarters of the season, playing at a very high level, batting down passes, getting to the quarterback, being a much better run defender. I was really impressed with what Dean Lowry put on tape, and I was not a Dean Lowry defender. I thought prior to last season that he probably should have been a player that Green Bay looked to move on from and save the salary cap space and use it elsewhere. I'm happy to say I was wrong, that Lowry bounced back and had a really nice season. Through the first 4 games last year, he was really struggling again. And I'm just like, all right, here we go again. Another, poor Dean Lowry season. Why did they keep him around at that price point? Like, it didn't make much sense. And then after the first month, he found himself. He played stronger. He played a more physical brand of football. Coach Montgomery, I think, really started to, find the right buttons to push with Lowry, and he responded. And again, I'm very excited to see what he can do, especially in this remade defensive line with Jerron Reed, Kenny Clark, TJ Slayton, Devontae Wyatt. I just think they have a really great rotation, and I think Dean Lowry is going to be a big piece of that. And then the third one, when I talked to Marcus, was the one that's totally off the radar. Nobody's talking about him, but I just think he's a good football player. Probably won't make the team, but if he ever gets his opportunity, I do think he's going to make the most of it, and that's Patrick Taylor. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. You watch him in practice, he is a big dude with soft hands who can run hard. I just think that there's something there. And again, I don't know that he's ever going to get his full true shot, but if all of a sudden Green Bay or some other team has a couple injuries and they have to put in Patrick Taylor at running back, I think they are going to be incredibly pleasantly surprised with how well he can play. I think he can pass protect. I think he can power run. I think he can, catch the ball really well out of the backfield. I don't think he's ever going to be like a dynamic passing threat. I don't think he's ever going to be an explosive playmaker, but he's not like this slow lumbering running back either, especially for his size. He's got a really good blend, and I do think at some point, I'm hopeful he gets his opportunity and he's going to make some team happy, hopefully the Green Bay Packers. So Amos, Lowry, and Patrick Taylor were my initial responses to Marcus. I do think there's 2 other players, though, who are also on that underrated list. The first being Rashaan Gary. And I kind of went into this offseason feeling like people were starting to understand how good Rashaan Gary was. And then there was the ESPN article recently that listed like the top 10 edge rushers as ranked by executives or personnel groups or whatever. And Rashaan Gary wasn't on that list. And I don't think he was even in the like honorable mentions. I think he was in like the others receiving votes. Yeah, he should have been a lot higher than that, in my opinion. And that leads me to believe he's very underrated. We've talked about Pro Football Focus a lot in the last few days. How about this for Gary? His rookie year, he graded as a 55.8. His sophomore year, I'm talking about in the NFL here, his second year in the NFL, 68.1. Last year, 89.8. So he went from 55.8 to 68.1 to 89.8. And then anytime you're around 90 or above, you're doing something really, really right. How about this? He went from, in his rookie season, 256 snaps to 530 snaps to 722 snaps. So he continues to get better. He continues to play more. And how about this last one? 87 pressures on 481 pass rush attempts. That is incredible. Just how productive he was, not just with sacks, but with pressures and QB hits and everything. You name it, Rashaan Gary was producing it. And all of a sudden, if he gets up to, 800, 900 snaps and maybe 500, 600 pass rush attempts, like those pressures could go through the roof. And the other thing that I'll say here is Green Bay was not a team that got a lot of teams in 3rd and long situations with any regularity. If this defense is as good as we think they can be, and they're better on early downs, and they're now going 3rd and long more consistently, more obvious pass situations, Rashaan Gary is going to get a chance to do some real serious work. And I think, I think there's another step that Gary can take. I expect him to be in the 90s with that PFF score. I think he's going to be one of the best absolute edge rushers in all of football. And if executives are thinking that he's not even in the top 10, he, at that point, is underrated. And then last but not least is an offensive lineman. Tune in tomorrow because there's going to be some offensive linemen that are on the other side of the bill on the overrated list. But I think one of the more underrated, not only offensive linemen on the Packers, but I think in the NFL is John Runyan Jr. He was my highest graded offensive lineman for the Packers a season ago. Now, to be fair, Elton Jenkins missed a good portion of the season. David Bakhtiari missed all but 30 some snaps. So there's better offensive linemen on the roster than John Runyan Jr. but he was Mr. Consistency. He didn't miss time. This was his first real starting opportunity from beginning of the season to end of season. I thought he made the most of it. This is a 6th-round pick just a couple of seasons ago. He's still putting on functional strength. I still think there's a higher ceiling that he has the ability to get to. I think Jon Runyan Jr. can be a Pro Bowl player. Like, I don't know that he's going to be like an 8-time Pro Bowler, but I think he can make a couple Pro Bowls over the course of his career. I think he's just going to get better. I think last year he was just sniffing the surface of what he's capable of. He needs to be more consistent within the game, meaning that there will be times in a game where he's just sort of like cruising along, and then it's almost like he gets on cruise control and then like has a couple mistakes. If he can just eliminate those and just maintain focus and intensity through the entire of the game, look the heck out. But I was so impressed in, Runyan's first full season as a starter, and I still think there's another full step for him to take, and I think he's going to continue to get better. I don't think a lot of people, fans, obviously fans of the Packers know Jon Runyan Jr., but I don't think a lot of people that are fans of football in general know about Jon Runyan Jr. yet. I think that needs to change. I think he's still very underrated, and he is my 5th player on my all underrated list for the Packers. So to recap, Adrian Amos, Rashaan Gary, Dean Lowry, Jon Runyan Jr., and Patrick Taylor. Those are my 5 most underrated Packers in sort of different lenses, right? Some as a Patrick Taylor, just, again, bottom of the roster guy that I think has the opportunity if he ever gets a chance. Some top of the roster guys like Amos and Gary who just aren't getting their sort of, due respect through the course of the league. And then Lowry and Jon Runyan Jr., Lowry more of with our fan base, the Packer fan base, where I don't think he's quite getting the respect he deserves. And I think Jon Runyan Jr. more that up-and-coming player that I don't think a lot of people know about yet, but probably should know more about him. So that's going to do it for me today. Check out my episode tomorrow going over the most overrated players on the Packers. I will see you then. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.